for making people angry. I know I'm angry. That's why I've got a Barbary Corsairs flag behind me there. If I move my head right, I can get these Mickey Mouse ears. This is actually, I didn't just convert to Wahhabism. Helen thought this was a Saudi flag. It's not a Saudi flag. It's a Barbary Corsairs flag. See the two crossed swords there? The Barbary Corsairs were pirates operating off the Moroccan and Algerian coast back in the day, and I just like their flag. So, okay, let's go to the angry Americans story. The NBC poll tells us 70% of Americans are angry at the establishment, and the other 30% just need to tune in to False Flag Weekly News. Helen, is it our fault that everybody is so angry?
Okay,
those of us
Kevin,
broadcasting.
there is a problem. So we're gonna start. Let's sort of like start over again. Okay?
Oh, okay. Well, how's that going to help?
I'm sorry, but it took too long for the stream to go through. I'm turning off my mic and go ahead and start right now.
Welcome to False Flag Weekly News. I'm Kevin Barrett with guest host Helen Byniski back. She's in the regular rotation now, and I'm very happy about that. So welcome back, Helen.
Hey there, good to be here.
All right. Well, let's take our obligatory disclaimers, false flag or obscene content, but rather because that we are a news criticism show. We look over the stories of the past week and we critique the news stories that are coming at us primarily from the mainstream media from an angle that some may find repulsive, tasteful, or shocking, as we're seeking real truth, or at least we're questioning what it is. And if you can't handle that, please go watch some cat videos. If you like it, please stick with us and tell your friends about us. So obligatory warnings aside, there is a propaganda push right now to blame the alternative media and people like us who question the mainstream media for the anger that's supposedly bubbling over among the white nationalists and the other polarized people out there getting into street fights in Portland and things like that. It's all our fault, right? Well, I don't know, but NBC tells us that 70% of Americans are angry at the establishment. We do have a couple of other PSAs though. Let's go back to our announcements. Sorry, I didn't put these on the story list, but there's a film festival on 9/11 in Oakland, California at the Grand Lake Theater, and No Lies Radio will be broadcasting that as well as other events this 9/11. Please do go to noliesradio.org and get your tickets. Okay, boy, we have a lot of obligatory stuff to get through here. Okay, so here we are being monitored by people who say that questioning how the World Trade Center came down is hate speech, and we hope that the people monitoring us will actually look into that issue and learn something.
Supposedly some of them have. I mean, they say that some people have actually had their minds changed by moderating Facebook content. So there's hope for these people. I mean, just because they start life as pod people doesn't mean they have to be that way forever.
Well, we covered a story a couple of months ago about I think it was the New York Times story that pointed out one of the biggest problems in censoring the internet is that you hire these internet censors and they look at this stuff and they end up agreeing with it. Well, we're going to get to that a little bit later. There's a BBC story about some guy who has to monitor the internet for his job and he got like PTSD from it or something. Well, let's move on to the reason that we're so dangerous, according to the establishment, is that we make people angry. And maybe we think they should be angry. But hey, if 70% of Americans are angry, that means the other 30% are not paying attention and need to watch False Flag Weekly News. This was an NBC poll. So Helen, you think that the United States of America is a cauldron bubbling over with boiling rage?
Well, it's like the FBI said in that document about how all conspiracy theorists are actually domestic extremists waiting to happen. They admit that it's because there are so many plots by powerful people that's why everybody's conspiracy theorizing, because, you know, there's conspiracies everywhere you look. So in this case, it's, there's a deep and boiling anger because there's a lot to be angry at. I mean, I just love how they say, oh, well, amid the great economy, people are worried about their economic future. What great economy? Where? Can I have some? Like, where is this great economy that we're talking about? They're so delusional. It's like they think that, 70% of people just have rage problems. No, this society is 90% of the way down the hill. The last 10% doesn't really matter. It's the 30% who aren't enraged that I'm worried about.
Well, that's right. You know, if you go back to when the minimum wage was established in, I think, 1960 or so, and you extrapolate, if it had kept up with inflation, it would today be something like $30 an hour. And that tells you what's happened to the people at the lowest end of our society, and even in the middle. I mean, a lot of people who consider themselves educated middle class are not keeping up with the 1960 minimum wage. So that's one reason for anger. And another is that I think that the moral structure of society has kind of fallen apart. Maybe that's partly because people are getting better information now and they see how the elites are really behaving. Maybe they didn't know that in the past, and so they believed in the public myths and went to church and hypocritically mouthed the bromides. But for whatever reason, it seems to me that society is falling apart. And one of the interesting things in this poll was that since 1998, there's been a big decrease in the share of people who think that religion is important. It was 62% in 1998. It's 48% now. And Helen, you may not agree with me, but I think 9/11 was partly engineered not only to discredit the religion of Islam, which is a big threat to the international bankers because of its prohibition of usury, but to discredit religion in general, because I think that the kind of Freemasonic forces that created the modern world are actually satanic, and they're waging an ideological war against religion. And 9/11 was a pagan style or satanic style mass human sacrifice designed to create a false religion that's aimed at hating on real or authentic traditional religion. So I'm sure you have a different...
Religion has done a pretty good job of discrediting itself. I mean, what with the Catholic Church scandal and, certain other religions getting all wrapped up in 9/11, and certain other religions, murdering massive quantities of Palestinians and things like that. There's just not a lot to cling to with regards to faith. And I think in general, there's just less willingness to cling to authority because, like you said, people have more information. Now, it may have been easier to just believe what you were told from the 4 main TV networks in the past, but we also have this problem that the propaganda is actually working very well, at least up until a certain point. Once kids leave their parents' house and have to fend for themselves in the world, they find that the American dream they've been spoon-fed for the first 18 years of their life does not match up to the reality at all. And they get really upset because, when you've been sold that you live in this magical world of unicorns and, you can be anything you want, and, the world is your oyster, and then you get out there and you realize that, no, you're going to be slinging hamburgers for the rest of your life, then, people tend to get a little bit angry. But it's... Also, it's the 30% that I'm worried about, because that means that there are 30% of people who just, despite all evidence to the contrary, will not get mad. These people have had the rage beaten out of them or learned helplessness or something like that. Those are the ones that I'm very worried about.
Well, if you know anybody who's not angry, please tell them about False Flag Weekly News. And once they start paying attention to the 30 news stories we cover each week, they'll start getting angry. How about this finding that there is an emerging America where issues like children, religion, and patriotism are less important, according to Republican pollster Bill Mack Strategies. Well, at first glance, that sounds like, okay, so Ozzie and Harriet no longer exists. Children, religion, and patriotism, as cliche and hackneyed as that stuff is, this represents people living for something beyond themselves, their egos, their momentary desires, their comfort, their luxuries, their pleasures. If you're a materialist and basically just living for whatever I enjoy, why would you bother to sacrifice for something like for children? Having children is such a huge sacrifice investment. Why would you bother sacrificing for God? There's the religion. And why would you bother sacrificing for your society, your country, et cetera, which is patriotism? So I'm actually ambivalent about this.
Well, the problem with patriotism is that everything that our country once stood for, it no longer does. I actually wrote an article about this a few months ago, going through every single article of the Bill of Rights and explaining how we no longer have these rights. And so, what is there to be patriotic about? There's no country anymore. It's a cardboard cutout of the country that once was, and then behind it is just people ripping each other off. So absolutely. I can understand why patriotism has gone down the tubes, because there really is nothing to be patriotic about here anymore. Yes, this country was founded on noble ideals. Yes, very much so. Those noble ideals have been seen in a while, and we're starting to wonder what happened to them. So again, that's why people are upset.
But wait a minute, we're coming up on Patriots Day, when we got this 9/11 event, which brought us the Patriot Act. I think you make a good point that this attempt to inculcate phony patriotism by this 9/11 false flag operation has backfired. If it was supposed to make the American people unite in patriotism, it might have worked for 6 months of phony, delusional patriotism. But the long-term effect is the opposite. People are becoming incredibly cynical and angry And they should be. So let's talk about 9/11. We're coming up on the anniversary, and we had a very interesting. About what?
One thing about the Patriot Act, though, is that so when you take a word like patriot and you assign it to something as draconian and evil as the Patriot Act, people start to associate the word patriot with that bad thing, which is why you can't use words like freedom or democracy anymore, because they're associated with, you know, the word the Operation Enduring Freedom or Iraqi freedom.
Yeah. Freedom fries. Give me some freedom fries.
For bombing the crap out of people. So the words don't work anymore. Democracy, half the world thinks that democracy is what happens when America shows up and drops bombs on you. So we can't use words like these anymore. But anyway, on to 9/11.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, and so these people who inculcated this wave of phony patriotism on 9/11 that they're trying desperately to keep going every year on the anniversary actually undermined everything they were trying to do in the long term. Let's look at some interesting 9/11 related stories. Here's one from Veterans Today, where I'm a co-editor. And Veterans Today has been a leading source of folks who think there was a nuclear component to the demolition of the 3 skyscrapers, indeed the demolition of the entire World Trade Center. Every single building was totaled that had a WTC prefix, and all the buildings that didn't have WTC prefixes, including some much closer to the towers than Building 7 was not totaled, although some of them got these giant 100-ton steel frame members that were blasted upwards and outwards out of the towers, impaled in them. How did that happen? Why were there, nobody was hurt by falling glass. Why were there toasted cars? All huge numbers of automobiles in the area all looked like they got toasted and instantly rusted. Why was there a huge circular hole just completely vaporized, blown out of Building 7, or Building 6 rather? Why was there this huge time interval between the initial impact and then the fall of the towers? And why was the paper didn't burn, and yet the cars fried? There was no there wasn't the right seismic footprint. Nothing slammed into the earth, as would happen if tall buildings collapsed. Why were people vaporized? Why are there 1,100 people who were in those buildings? And the building supposedly collapsed on them. The entire body should remain intact if squashed, yet despite meticulous sifting and bucketing operations that got every single scrap of bone or fingernail that was available, 1,100 human bodies utterly and completely disappeared, vaporized. How do you explain all that? And one way of explaining it is through this nuclear hypothesis. And I thought that the interesting thing about this article, coming from this German guy, Palmer, however you pronounce it, is that it does stick closer to a lot of the observations than some of the previous work that's been done on the nuclear hypothesis. Helen, your thoughts?
Yeah, the problem with the nuclear hypothesis is, I mean, wouldn't there be radiation? I mean, that's generally what's left behind.
Well, thyroid cancers that we just got, it's now confirmed that there's a much higher rate of thyroid cancers among the first responders than there should be.
If you take a Geiger counter down there and you measure it, like, where's the radiation? The nuclear bombs leave traces. This did not seem to do so. I mean, it certainly, you asked a lot of good questions just now, and I don't know the answers to those, but like, the laws of physics apply here, and I mean, you can't, the laws of physics didn't take a day off, as much as the 9/11 Commission would like to say that they did. And I don't see, it may be some kind of weapon we do not know that exists, or something we don't know much about, but I don't see nuclear bombs. I mean, those things leave some traces, and this didn't.
Right. That's and there's been a very interesting debate on that topic, and I haven't yet watched the presentation by Palmer, so I don't know what he's saying. What I do know is that the neutron bombs, for example, are bombs where the kind of energy. See, apparently in the latest, or even starting in the 1960s and 70s, it became possible to change the energy output of a nuclear weapon. So you could have it all come out as radiation, or you could have it mostly come out as other forms of energy. And so the kinds of particles that are left behind, the kinds of radiation that are left behind, depend on the way that these post-Hiroshima era bombs are engineered. And so that's the kind of answer that you get from the people who are arguing it was a nuclear event, that there certainly wasn't nearly the kind of radiation that we get on the stuff that was tested back in the days when they were testing in the before 1962, 63. But there is a radiation signature. It's just much less than one would get from those first generation bombs. In any case, it's a complicated topic. I'm going to try to get some physics knowledgeable people to comment on this. It's an interesting debate.
I don't know enough about it, honestly.
Yeah, me either. So let's move on to a field that we're both more familiar with, which is media criticism. How about this Mark Boal producing an ABC 9/11 series for the upcoming 20th anniversary in 2021? It's going to be called Fall and Rise, the story of 9/11. And this fall and rise thing, I mean, this is, this is like replacing the Christian myth. I mean, I think they're engineering post-Christianity, Helen. I think that, like, the Holocaust, the Holocaust is replacing Christianity. The Holocaust itself is the crucifixion, and the miraculous rise of the state of Israel in the aftermath is the resurrection. And here we have with 9/11, the destruction of these buildings and 3,000 people is the crucifixion, and then the rise of Larry Silverstein's new buildings and the rise of America going off towards smiting its enemies is the resurrection. And here they've hired this propagandist, what's his name, this guy Mark Boal, to do this. And I think these myth makers selling this genocide propaganda, which has killed 27 million people in the 9/11 wars, according to Gideon Polya, these people are war criminals. This guy needs to be prosecuted.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same thing as the propagandist for the Red Army who was dropping leaflets as the soldiers were rushing through Germany saying, kill all the women and children, kill everyone, kill. It's the same one as the propagandists who are in Israel now saying, kill all the Palestinians, the snakes will grow up. And this is the same thing. It's genocidal propaganda, and it's the name of the show is Fall and Rise. That is the cheesiest thing I've ever heard. But first is tragedy, then is farce, right? I mean, this is
tragedy. This is farce.
This is the embarrassment of these new religions, these new cheesy cut-rate religions. At least the old religions had some good stories, had some characters you could sort of believe in, maybe a little bit. I mean, they were all kind of one-dimensional, let's be honest. But this thing is like that's a joke. Larry Silverstein is supposed to be our hero because he took out a big old insurance policy and cashed in. Hey, that's the American dream, right? Cashing in on others' misfortune. No, I don't think so. I'll keep Greek myths were pretty cool. I'll keep those and leave these alone.
Likewise, I'm definitely not going to be worshiping at the church of the 9/11 fall and rise, the satanic human sacrifice. And of course, religions are inherently sacrificial. René Girard is the great anthropologist who's talked about that. And I think they engineered 9/11 as a human sacrifice in order to create this kind of phony religious myth that would have an intergenerational effect, steering American politics and culture long after it happened. And Philip Zelikow, who wrote the 9/11 Commission report and who calls himself an expert in the creation and maintenance of public myths, admits that that's what he's interested in, these myths like Pearl Harbor that have an intergenerational effect. U.S. military did massive psychological studies in the 1990s to figure out why people still hated Japanese people almost 50 years after World War II. And they discovered that it was because the Japanese had punctured America's myth of invulnerability. We thought the oceans would protect us. They didn't. And we never forgave the Japanese. And so likewise, the people that engineered 9/11 wanted to make sure we would never forgive the Muslims for
that makes sense.
Our sense of create a whole argue that Zionism is the obvious main beneficiary of 9/11.
Yeah, it got us to fight their wars.
Israel desperately needed the United States. And so people are putting out pamphlets in Novato, California now, but they're not blaming Zionism or Israel. They're supposedly blaming Jews, at least according to this Times of Israel story. But if you look at the pamphlet that's supposedly this horrible anti-Semitic pamphlet, yeah, right. But
we have to say
it's certainly okay, more. Yeah, that's true. We got a strike on YouTube last week for probably because our co-host talked about Jews as a group in ways that you're not supposed to talk about. And even though I kind of questioned him and pushed back somewhat, I don't think YouTube thought that I was harsh enough. I should have condemned him as an evil anti-Semite, but I don't think he is. So I just gave my feedback. So here we have a story where somebody's putting out this pamphlet. It says, "Are Jews responsible for 9/11?" Personally, I think that is a kind of a dubious question, but the facts cited, isn't this interesting, Helen, that in this Times of Israel story, the way that they discuss the facts listed in this pamphlet. 60 Israeli Jews were arrested on 9/11. I'm not sure that's actually true. I think there were actually a couple hundred, but they were arrested before 9/11. For the most part, it was only the dancing Israelis arrested on 9/11. It discusses the dancing Israelis. It discusses the beginning of the war on terror that benefited Israel. It mentions is Larry Silverstein making $5 billion in insurance money, buying the Trade Center 2 months before the event and doubling the insurance money, and walking off with all that money, even after he confessed that he demolished one of the buildings himself or was involved in the decision to pull the building. So these facts are, for the most part, a lot more accurate, as you said earlier, than the official story. But by headlining it as Jews, are Jews responsible for 9/11? To my mind, this actually tends to discredit some of the actual factual research. What do you think?
They stick that poison pill in there, and while it is indeed more accurate than the 9/11 Commission, if you substitute Zionists or Israelis or Israeli agents or something like that for the J word, I'm going to try not to get this channel a strike, just, keeping an eye out for you guys.
Thanks.
They definitely got a lot of the facts correct. The 5 dancing Israelis, while they put them in the site of the buildings instead of across the river, and as you said, the 60 were not arrested on 9/11. I thought it was less, but there were more arrested before. I mean, there were all those Israeli art students running around in sensitive government sites trying to sell mass-produced Chinese paintings, which is just bizarre. And people still try to say that didn't happen. And it's like, well, yeah, actually it did. There's still like DEA records of that sort of thing. But it might be meant to discredit the entire Israeli involvement story, or it might just be somebody thought that they would get a rise out of people by using the J word instead of the I word or the Z word. And unfortunately, I don't think that kind of thing really accomplishes much, because you want to get as many of the sane Jews on our side as possible. And there are plenty of them. So blaming them all for 9/11 is not going to really get you far in life. I mean, what we want eventually is to have them, throw the bums out in Israel and live peacefully with the Palestinians. You're not going to do that by antagonizing the entire religion. So.
Yeah, I agree. Well, look at the way that the Times of Israel pushed back against this flyer by, look at the way they discussed the factual claims in the flyer, which they really hardly discussed them at all. But here's the sentence. According to the Times of Israel, the authors of the flyer said that Israelis were seen dancing on the site of the collapsed Twin Towers. Wait a second. Nobody says that any Israelis went to ground zero and danced on the molten metal. Yeah. I mean, this is kind of a straw man approach, isn't it? And that a Jewish Israeli man made billions in insurance money. Well, that's Larry Silverstein, and that's undisputed. Just Google him. And that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu praised the attacks. Well, his first reaction that day was, quote, it's very good. And then he caught himself and he said, well, it's not good, but it sure is good for Israel. So most of these facts are actually true. And yet the way it's presented in the Times of Israel here is designed to try to make people imagine that all these things are not true. They're just the demented ravings of congenital anti-Semitic maniacs. And maybe that's what they want. It may, just like all the stories early on about the thousands of Jews who didn't show up for work, where it turns out they came from an Israeli newspaper. That's where they first showed up. Then they went to a newspaper in Greece. I think that was all engineered by Mossad in order to cover for the fact that many Israelis were warned about 9/11. Zim Shipping Lines, which is owned by the state of Israel and the Rothschilds, moved out, breaking its lease and taking a huge financial hit less than 1 week before 9/11. And then there was
there was that messaging app. Odigo.
Odigo Instant Messaging sent out a message in Hebrew telling people to stay out of Lower Manhattan that day. These are undisputed facts. This was reported in Haaretz. Nobody's ever argued that it's not true. And so many Israelis were warned. Only a couple of Israelis died that day, whereas there were 29 died from Botswana and 60 from Nigeria and all this stuff. But Israelis who had a huge presence in the Trade Center got off very, very easily, possibly in part due to these warnings. Certainly if Zim hadn't moved out, there would have been many dozens of Israelis killed as well. So the way they discredit that is by putting out this story that there are evil anti-Semites talking about Jews. And that's what they did then, and that's probably what they're doing now. It's possible that this pamphlet is actually produced by the Israeli Mossad, or it could be produced by somebody who's not very savvy in terms of public relations.
Yeah, I don't know which one, but it could definitely be a Mossad thing. They do like to tar us all with that anti-Semite brush.
Indeed. And if you talk about occupied Palestine and the crimes going on there, then of course you're an evil, bigoted, Jew-hating anti-Semite. So let's talk about those crimes. Let's move to the crimes of Zion category. So how about the weekend over? What a weekend it was. We had Israel launching wars of aggression with military strikes on 3 of its neighbors, 3 independent sovereign countries attacked by Israel all in the same weekend. It's just another weekend in Israel, I guess.
Yeah, Syria, Lebanon, and Iraq. Yeah, and nobody's talking about it. I mean, I had to pitch the story to RT. They weren't covering it. Sputnik looks like it's covering it, but mainstream media, no, you don't see anything about this. I mean, yeah, Press TV obviously is covering it, but nobody else, and that's insane. If any other country attacked 3 of its neighbors in a weekend, you would never hear the end of it. They'd be hauled before the UN and crucified. Like, this is insane. Why?
So you have to watch Press TV. If you want to hear about this stuff, you have to go to the Iranian channel, Press TV, where I debated the Zionist guy from Berkeley, Lee Kaplan. What a character he is. And as I pointed out, he said he had some trouble hearing the questions, but he says exactly the same thing, whether or not he hears the questions, which is the big, bad, anti-Semitic power countries are attacking poor little innocent Israel for no reason. He says this over and over and over. I mean, you debate somebody like that.
It's impossible, because the way that they decide what constitutes aggression is just, okay, so a country doesn't like you and that's aggression and that's your excuse to bomb them. Oh, well, they were preparing for a killer drone strike. It's like, no, they weren't, and you don't even have to show proof because you're Israel and they get away with everything. And if any other country tried to pull that, they would be just blown off the face of the earth. And there was like one faction in Iraq, that the Iraqi parliament, that tried to get up an international coalition of countries to go after Israel. I mean, yeah, good luck with that. But it has to be done, because the U.S. certainly isn't going to rein in its master. That's impossible. So it's just going to keep getting worse. And who wants to get reelected? And he didn't last time. So, like, I mean, the election, he marginally won the election, but he didn't win out completely over his rival. And now he's got Ehud Barak, Jeffrey Epstein's favorite prime minister, going up against him, and he's going to have a war. So whether it's with Gaza or whether it's with every single other one of his neighbors, I think he wants to start off a thing in Iran and get the U.S. in there. But I guess first he has to antagonize everybody else. I don't understand why the Israeli people fall for this again and again. I would hope that they were smarter than that. But I guess they're brainwashed. That's what the mandatory military service is all about.
Well, they attacked 3 countries over the weekend, but on the Friday before that, they shot 122 unarmed protesters, which is pretty much par for the course. Just another Friday in Gaza. Yeah, that's why the totals are in the thousands. Is it 6,000 people they've shot now, and I forget how many hundreds are dead. So here, 122 last Friday, and probably as we're speaking right now, they're shooting more, because right now it's afternoon in occupied Palestine, and that's when the demonstrations happen after people come out of the mosques. And so there are the Israeli snipers sitting up there on their wall in their body armor and stuff, having fun, shooting civilians, and in some cases shooting to cripple. That's been the really disgusting thing they've been doing ever since the Great March of Return started, is intentionally crippling people. And that's happening even as we speak.
Yep, it's really disgusting. And once again, the international community is not paying any attention. Oh no, let's focus on the Hong Kong protesters, where the Chinese police fired a warning shot, and it scared the poor protesters. Here's protesters getting mowed down like animals, and the international community does not care, because it's all about who's doing the mowing down. And I mean, yeah, again, if you're not one of the 70% who's outraged, you're not paying attention, because this kind of stuff is being done in our name. U.S. is facilitating this. If the U.S. wasn't backing Israel, they wouldn't be able to get away with this. So it's, yep. Thank you, Uncle Sam.
Well, some people are starting to wake up and notice some of these things. And of course, if you do notice it and you speak out, you're going to be called an anti-Semite. And now, according to The Forward, which is the leading American Jewish publication, the evangelical community, long a bastion of support for Israel and insane Christian Zionism. These are most of them are Sunday morning TV yahoos who can't wait for Jesus to come back and nuke everybody. But some of them are reasonable people, and they're starting to wake up and notice what's really going on over here, noticing that if anybody is Antichrist, it would be Zionists. And so here's The Forward freaking out about this, quoting an evangelical woman who says that Trump is, quote, surrounded by a Zionist environment with completely different values from Christians. It's Kabbalist, it's Talmudic values. And she even suggested that the Zionists or the J words or whatever control the government. And the Forward is completely freaking out. But in the next slide, we see the same topic covered from the other side. The End Times Herald is a Christian, formerly Christian Zionist, now evangelical outlet that is railing about, against Zionism. So those two stories are really interesting. You can get the perspective from the Forward that is paranoid that the Christian Zionists are going to desert Israel, and then here are some ex-Christian Zionists calling it the way they see it. It's a very interesting pair of articles.
Yeah, I mean, the one is interesting because, of course, they allied the difference between anti-Semitism and anti-Zionism. I mean, the woman they're quoting is just saying, okay, Trump's surrounded by Zionists. Okay, that's not anti-Semitic to point that out. Trump is surrounded by Zionists, and he's completely, he's made it very clear that he wants to do their bidding. I mean, he's the second coming of Israel, of the King of Israel, or something like that. What was it that he said? There was some comment that he said that, I'm the chosen one, but there was another one.
Yeah. He called himself the chosen one. He retweeted Wayne Root, who had
that was it.
That, the Israelis consider him the king of Israel.
Yeah, and so just pointing that out is not anti-Semitic. Pointing that out is just kind of stating the obvious. But yeah, the whole thing with the evangelical embrace of Zionism has always been so bizarre to me because they really do want it to bring about the end of the world. And at the end of the world, they believe that their savior is going to come and, as you said, nuke everybody. So it's not that they've ever really embraced Zionism, but as a means to an end. They don't like Jews. They're generally, especially the ones in the South, at least the stereotype is that they're the most bigoted bunch you'll ever find. I don't know how true that is. I know plenty of evangelicals who are not, in fact, bigoted at all. But this idea that they really love the Jewish people, no, they love the Jewish people as a means to an end.
They want to get rid of the Jewish people, the Christian Zionists.
They want to get raptured.
They say all the Jews, they say all the Jews have to be converted to Christianity, and the ones who aren't are going to be eliminating all. They have to eliminate all Jews, probably a lot more than Hitler ever did.
Yeah, they want to get raptured, and everybody else left over gets killed. So this idea that it's only just now they've become anti-Semitic. Well, yeah, they never really had much use for Jews except as a means to an end.
Indeed. Well, if we talk about these things, we face the likelihood that there's somebody who's going to get upset and try to get our YouTube channel strikes and taken down. And, we're going to get censored if we even talk about this reasonably and kindly and gently. And so who's censoring us? Well, they're hiring people like Sean Spiegel. And Sean Spiegel became a bit of a whistleblower, talked to the BBC about the PTSD he has suffered from having to moderate the internet. And isn't this funny? They're policing the internet's most horrific content. What is the horrific content? The BBC says it ranges from suicide and murder videos to conspiracy theories and hate speech. Wow. Well, the suicide murder videos, the animal torture that he doesn't like, that's nothing. It's the conspiracy theories that are so traumatizing.
Yeah, I love how they try to just conflate the two. I mean, I wouldn't want to look at people getting suicided or murdered or whatever all day either, but conspiracy theories, really? Those are supposed to be what are giving these people PTSD? I mean, I wrote about this for RT a few months ago when that first article came out about the content moderators who were so traumatized that they were having sex in the parking lot and smoking dope in the bathrooms and whatever. It's a little bit ridiculous that's supposed to be what's traumatizing them, these conspiracy theories, because obviously, yeah, you're looking at animal torture videos all day. You're not going to be a well-adjusted person, and you're probably, I'm sure it does something to you psychologically, but this idea that they're trying to to put the two as equivalent, that these people are getting these people are getting conspiracy stress disorder. No, these people are getting post-traumatic stress disorder from like moderating 9/11 videos or historical revisionism or flat Earth. I mean, the other one tried to say that flat Earth was like giving people nightmares. I mean, yeah, some of these flat Earth espousing people are dumb enough to give you nightmares, yes, but it's a little ridiculous. And I love how they always pick the most pathetic looking sad sacks to put as the picture on there. I mean, I'm sure that this fellow is a normal human being, but they really did pick the most pathetic sad sack looking picture of him that they could find to really make
he should protest, because see, if you actually read the article, you see that he didn't say anything about conspiracy theories. Yeah. He's a whistleblower because he said that as an animal lover, he was distraught that animal content was, for the most part, never accelerated or never referred for removal. So his problem was, in fact, that they were telling him to try to take down the conspiracy theories, which apparently didn't bother him. But when there are people torturing animals for fun and putting up the videos, they won't take those down. That's what he's saying. But the BBC is twisting his words, putting up a bad picture of him, and trying to use this to smear so-called conspiracy theorists. So somebody should complain to the BBC. In fact, I think this guy, Sean Spiegel, should lodge a complaint.
Yeah, I hope he is. I mean, there's so many people still complaining to the BBC about that Jeremy Corbyn documentary that they did. I don't know if the BBC's complaint inbox is going to get to the bottom anytime soon, but yeah, he should complain. I mean, but most people, I mean, that's that Syrian family that the BBC covered, where they said that they covered a Syrian family whose son was injured in an airstrike by U.S.-backed forces, I think Turkish forces. And they said that the airstrike was a Syrian airstrike. And the family, of course, was up in arms because, dude, you came to our house, you took pictures of our son, and you lied about who almost killed him. Like, you guys are the scum of the earth. And they changed the headline like 5 times before finally like admitting that it was a Turkish airstrike. And like, so the BBC has no credibility. And the fact that they're still referred to as an outlet of record is just embarrassing. It's like the New York Times. I mean, spent 3 years pushing a bogus conspiracy theory while ignoring legitimate conspiracy facts. And no wonder people are losing faith in our institutions. Our institutions are not worth having faith in.
Absolutely. And Sean Spiegel, if you want to come on my show, I will actually listen to what you say, and I will agree with you that they should be taking down animal torture videos and leave the free political speech up. Well, speaking of whistleblowers from these evil censorship organizations, how about this Zach Voorhees? You interviewed him because you saw that he was not getting a fair deal. They're smearing him as saying that Israel did 9/11, so therefore you can't listen to anything he says. Don't look at the documents that he leaked from Google because he thinks Israel did 9/11, and he believes
it's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. You can't pick and choose your whistleblowers. What are you going to do? Wait till the next Google whistleblower comes out, especially now that they're restricting everybody from doing political speech and have probably doubled down on surveillance of their own employees? No, this guy leaked 1,000 pages of documents. Read the documents, talk to him. That I couldn't believe. Like, I was really shocked at how few media outlets. I mean, of course, yeah, he went on Alex Jones. He went on like a few other of those kind of shows. But I wanted him to get more exposure and not just be talking about Chinese communists or whatever it is that Alex Jones is on about these days. And so, yeah, I did the interview, and he had a very smart response to that Daily Beast smear piece, which is, okay, you think these are fringe ideas? Look them up on Google Trends, not on Google Search because Google Search censors, but look them up on Google Trends and see how fringe they are. And he's right. I mean, a lot of people are talking about this. 2/3 of the American population believes in some conspiracy theory or other. So if you want to write him off as a fringe person who you shouldn't associate with, I mean, yeah, that's your loss, because those documents really paint a terrifying picture of what Google is actually doing. It's not a search engine company. It's a social engineering company. And the reason shareholders aren't up in arms about them losing money is that there are 2 tiers of shareholders. Is the ones that are the in crowd, and there's the other ones that don't have any voting rights who can't complain that the company is not as profitable as it once was. So
Google is censoring online media. And we had another horrific censorship story of a print publication in Toronto. There was this publication called Your Ward News, put out by a colorful character named Dr. James Sears. And they just sentenced him to a maximum of a year in prison. That is 6 months each, on 2 counts of willfully promoting hate against privileged minorities, Jews and women. Well, I don't know how privileged women are, but in any case, here he is actually doing hard prison time for what he says is satire. Now, I haven't read this paper. I don't know whether it's recognizable as satire or good satire. You know, I do satire and half the people don't seem to understand that it's satire. So, I mean, are they going to lock me up in prison? I hope not.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an article for RT where I referred to the Ministry of Truth, and somebody in the comment section was like, oh my God, they have an actual Ministry of Truth now. And I'm like, dude, no, satire, come on, man. So I don't know, maybe it's not recognizable satire. I haven't read it either, but I mean, Canada's been doing this stuff since the Zundel trials, so it's not really a surprise. I mean, if you want to write inflammatory political content, I would say do it in another country, although the US is rapidly becoming just as bad. I don't think they lock people up for that sort of thing in the US yet, although I could be wrong, and I certainly don't want to be the test case. Yeah, this is really just sad, because if you can't make fun of the people in power, if you can't make fun of anybody, I mean, people should be able to take a joke. Like I said, I haven't read the thing, so I don't know if it's recognizable as satire, if it's truly hateful. Even if it's truly hateful, I mean, does Canada? I get Canada doesn't have a First Amendment. I take it, but I don't know. I mean, it's disgusting either way. It's speech. I mean, what happened to sticks and stones will break my bones, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Well, we do have a First Amendment in the United States, and the tradition of the American courts interpreting it says that satire is especially protected. So apparently that doesn't hold for Canada, and maybe it doesn't hold here either. But so far, the FBI hasn't contacted me about any of my satirical articles. They're just interested in things like why I leave Arabic notebooks on planes, and whether I'm planning to go to Iran for a scholarly conference, and if I do, I'll be arrested. These are the things that the FBI gets back to me about. They don't get back to me because they don't think that my satirical articles are funny enough. I suppose that'll be the next step, though. If they don't laugh, then the joke will be on me.
Well, Snopes is
anyway,
going after
moving on to
Babylon.
the savage and
Sorry, so Snopes is going after the Babylon. Snopes is going after the Babylon Bee. They're a satirical website who's actually really funny. But yeah. It's like right-wing leaning satire. So the Snopes is like, this is fake news. No, get it off social media. Unclean. It's pretty sad, but
right.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to put out a book of satire. I hope to have that book out by early next year. But for all I know, Amazon will ban it because some of my satire is poking fun at certain groups and interests in ways that they may think are they'll call it hate speech, or they'll call it conspiracy theorizing or something. So we'll see how that goes. But anyway, the world is getting more and more unequal. In so many ways, people are unequal in their ability to push back against being defamed. Obviously, think about the 27 million dead Muslims due to 9/11. Well, here's economic inequality. Oxfam says that the G7 needs to start ensuring that the richest people and corporations pay their fair share. And then in the next slide, we see that the Democrats are targeting wealth, not just income. And this, to me, is a solution. In Islam, we have a 2% annual wealth tax on all Muslims who have more wealth than the bare minimum to get by. And I think that should probably be raised a couple of percentage points, but who am I to argue with God? In any case, the Democrats may be encroaching on very sensitive territory here by talking about taxing wealth, not just income. You know, I have friends who live on inherited wealth, who live on invested wealth, who pay virtually no taxes, while I'm paying half of my sub-poverty level income in taxes. And that's obviously insane. So let's tax the wealth.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, the Wall Street transaction tax would also be a very good way to raise some money. But I don't know how far this will go, given how bought and paid for Congress is. However, it is at least the beginnings of a solution. And I'm surprised to see that even made it into the Wall Street Journal. Maybe the fact that things are more unequal than they've ever been in human history is like starting to percolate into the realms of mainstream media. That's an encouraging sign. I mean,
well, I don't think the Wall Street Journal was for this.
Yeah, but begging the G7 to suddenly start paying attention to the less fortunate is going to go nowhere. They're too busy virtue signaling about the rainforest. But obviously things are more unequal than they have been, at least in our lifetimes, in our grandparents' lifetimes. Something has to be done, or else it's going to be pitchforks and torches time for the fat cats.
And one of the symptoms of this gross inequality is unequal justice. And the so-called billionaire Jeffrey Epstein, who's probably lounging on a beach in Tel Aviv even as we speak, although he may have been murdered, we don't know for sure. We know that his sugar daddy, Les Wexner, who's part of the mega group of Israeli spies, probably encouraged Jeffrey Epstein to get all of this dirt on the wealthiest, most powerful Americans to be used by Israel and perhaps by elements of the CIA and organized crime as well. So the stories on Epstein this week include that they're claiming that the camera footage of what happened there in this most secure jail in America is totally unusable, according to the Washington Post. We have the next story that back in 2000, Trump was apparently, his plane was being used for Epstein's sex trafficking. And of course, we don't know for sure that Trump knew that. We have another.
There's no evidence that Trump knew that. This is just an excuse to smear Trump. Like, there are so many things to smear Trump on. Do you have to, like, this is embarrassing. I mean, Daily Mail should know better. But yeah, the Epstein camera thing, I mean, that was a joke that was going around when he was first suicided. And it was, at that point, it was discredited. It came from some, like, journalist that, not even journalist, some, like, social media info warrior that nobody had ever heard of. And people were like, no, that there's no evidence that that's the case. And now it comes out that that's the case. Why are they only finding out about this now? This is embarrassing.
Well, the Washington Post got scooped by the underground media once again. So Trump, I don't know about the Trump-Epstein relationship. It might be huge and it might not be. We don't know for sure. But certainly that lawsuit about Trump and Epstein raping the 13-year-old is.
They were certainly friends. I'm just talking about this particular one with the plane, like saying that he was trafficking this girl in his plane. No, he knew that she was underage. The author himself said that he couldn't tell if she was 15 or 20. I don't think that Trump would have been able to tell either. I mean, it's not
right. But whether he even cared is another story. Anyway, moving on to Dershowitz, another scumbag friend of Epstein.
No.
Yeah, worse than Trump, but probably. He's saying he's the victim of this whole thing. It's all about getting Alan Dershowitz. He's an innocent victim of these trafficked girls.
Yeah, Alan Dershowitz, the more he opens his mouth, the deeper he digs that hole. I mean, I'm just really hoping that if one good thing comes of this, it's that we never have to hear from Alan Dershowitz again. I don't know if that's possible to get rid of him. He seems to be just like omnipresent. But I mean, talk about like being able to judge a book by its cover. He really reminds me of like William S. Burroughs' Naked Lunch. There's a creature called a mugwump.
Yeah, he's a mugwump, isn't he?
He's a mugwump. It's really gross. I mean, he's the most gross, like, ew. I feel so bad for Virginia Roberts having to come out publicly and saying that she had sex with Alan Dershowitz. I mean, that's something that you're never going to live down. No amount of showering can get rid of that. That's just poor girls. Oh
boy. Well, let's move on to the story that actually is if you want to go to a one-stop shop for Jeffrey Epstein stuff, I would say the Mint Press series by Whitney Webb is maybe the place to go. Another installment came out this week on the Clinton-Epstein relationship. My colleagues at Veterans Today try to play that down, but I think that was very relevant. And I think the sentence that this was one of many such blackmail operations that have taken place for decades involving CIA, organized crime, and Israeli intelligence. That it all began shortly after World War II. Might have been going on before that even, but this particular nexus formed post-World War II. Really good historical context here from Whitney Webb.
Yep, this is a great series, and I would recommend that anybody who wants to know more of the background behind the whole Jeffrey Epstein phenomenon should read the whole thing. I mean, this is probably the most like up to date, up to current day. Like some of the other ones are start further back in the 20th century, but this one it does tie the whole thing together with regard to the Clintons. I mean, people try to act like Bill Clinton is like a big player in the whole thing. And no, he was just one of the people getting blackmailed. I mean, there's multiple levels of this thing. And while, yes, he is a corrupt scumbag, I guess, yes, he is still alive, although we don't hear from him much these days. I think Hillary's got him on a short leash. Yeah. But he was just another person getting blackmailed. He was not calling the shots, as they say. And Les Wexner, I love how he's coming out now saying, "Oh, Jeffrey Epstein took my money. I'm just a victim." Nobody wants to be a victim now that Epstein's dead. everybody wants to be a victim. I mean, Gloria Allred is out there trying to cash in, bringing new victims that nobody's ever heard of, who now say, oh, I was 22 when I was on a plane. I was a child sex slave. Yeah, you were 22, dude. What? I mean, yeah, whatever.
Right. Well, the victims everywhere, of all of them, I think Ellen Dershowitz is the most pathetic. But moving on to war on China, which could render all of this completely irrelevant if we get into World War III with the rising power China challenging the dominant established power of the United States of America, run secretly by the Israelis, in a Thucydides trap scenario where the rising power and the dominant power are almost doomed to fight. There are a lot of provocations going on right now. Over in Hong Kong, we have a 28-mile human chain of protesters, perhaps a Gene Sharp idea. This comes from the 1989 protests across the Baltic states. They did
because everybody in Hong Kong knows all about the Baltic states 30 years ago. They all study that shit. I mean, this is really funny that we're supposed to believe that they just genuinely came up with this idea.
Just came up with that themselves, yeah.
Just totally out of nowhere. Hey, how about we do that thing that the Baltic protesters did 30 years ago? Oh yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. This is so fake. I mean,
and of course that Baltic thing was almost certainly engineered by the CIA and its friends, or at least helped along by it. And so they're basically telling us that it's the same people doing it again.
Yep. Yeah, this is just rubbing it in our faces. I mean, this is embarrassing. Anybody who believes this is a genuine popular uprising, yeah, sure, guys.
And so the Chinese military may be moving in. They have vowed to contribute to stability, whatever that means. And then in the next slide, we have the Chinese deploying fresh troops in Hong Kong who look like they're ready to go. And the key date here is October 1st, which is the anniversary of the People's Republic. And the word is that might be the deadline. If the Hong Kong authorities can't put down these color revolution protests, then China will do it. And if China puts down the protests in Hong Kong, then Taiwan goes bananas. The US is required under treaty to defend Taiwan if the Chinese move in there. So things could get pretty crazy. And meanwhile, Trump can't decide whether China, the possible World War III target, is our bigger enemy than the Fed. Well, I can help him. Actually, the Fed is definitely a bigger enemy.
Bigger enemy for sure. Yeah, China. I mean, we should be cooperating with China. We don't have to be best friends with it, but they do have the potential to sink our economy if they decide to. So we have to at least make nice for a little while. And it's also that they're not going around the world bombing people, so they do kind of have the moral authority. But the Fed is definitely a much bigger problem.
I hope Trump calls in airstrikes against the Fed.
That'd be fun. Yeah, airstrikes all Washington D.C. Get all of Washington while you're at it. I mean, it's nobody useful is there.
Okay, well but buried in this story though is a kind of alarming Trump tweet. He says, "Our great companies are hereby ordered to immediately start looking for an alternative to China." So Trump is ordering our great companies, American multinationals, to get out of China. That's pretty crazy. That sounds like this decoupling thing that's been talked about by the China hawks. The China hawks are people who want to fall into this Thucydides trap and have the dominant power, the USA, go to war with China before China gets more powerful than the USA. And so how are we going to do that when our economies are completely interlinked? If we attack China today, then Walmart will close and we'll have to use Walmart as detention centers for people who watch False Flag Weekly News. And we wouldn't want that. So instead, we're going to decouple from China. And so Trump is going to thump his chest and order all corporations to leave China. And if indeed there is this total decoupling where this economic relationship suddenly ends, the only way that makes sense is prelude to a preemptive war by the United States against China, because the U.S. would be hurt much worse than China would be by decoupling. The only purpose of decoupling from an American perspective is a prelude to actual shooting war.
Yeah, and there's just nowhere to go. I mean, where else are you going to get your cheap plastic crap? I mean, Vietnam, maybe South Korea? No, not South Korea. South Korea is going to cost more. Bangladesh. I mean, there simply is not any other country with the manufacturing capacity that China has. The U.S. doesn't have it. All of our factories closed and shipped overseas a long time ago. So I don't see how the U.S. economy can recover from decoupling with China. There's just no other. I mean, what are we going to do? Rebuild our entire manufacturing capacity with what money? With money borrowed from whom? If we're decoupling from China, where are we going to get the money? So this is insane. I mean, this is not really going to work at all. As much as in Steve Bannon's wet dream, it might work. I mean, we should have used the article that I wrote about the Steve Bannon's China propaganda film, where where you've got some of the most stilted lines in the world, where they're talking up the noble democracy of the Canadians, jacking the Huawei CFO at the Vancouver airport. And oh no, they totally did that independently. It wasn't like the US told them to do it or anything. And there's like it's pretty funny, but you should watch the trailer for that. There's like a noble Canadian journalist who's part Chinese, and she's investigating Huawei, but they leave a dead cat on her car, and she finds it, but she's not discouraged. She goes after the story. Her boyfriend works for Huawei, so he has to choose between his lady love and the company that he works for. Cheesiest thing you'll ever see. Steve Bannon apparently worked in Hollywood for like over a decade. You would never know it to look at this movie. It's the most amateur hour, like cheesy stuff. But yeah, he's the one who has.
So he's not exactly another Leni Riefenstahl.
No. Leni Riefenstahl was
heroes,
a dying art for sure. Nobody's making propaganda films like that anymore. I mean, it's a little ridiculous, the stuff that.
Yeah, well, that's true, and that leads us to the question: how can we have a World War III when nobody really believes in the garbage being put out by the propagandists anymore, and when the propagandists themselves are so lame that they can't make us believe the garbage? So maybe that's
because they don't believe it themselves. They don't believe it at all. I mean, at least Leni Riefenstahl had some sort of faith in the regime that she was perpetuating. Like Steve Bannon is completely cynical about the future of the American way. I mean, he's off just trying to make money off anybody he can. And I mean, like I said, if the American patriots are chasing after an illusion now, there is no American dream to be patriotic about. But it's like you can't really make propaganda out of smoke and mirrors. You can try, but it comes off looking ridiculous.
So it sounds like that Steve Bannon is using this Mengwan arrest in Vancouver as part of propaganda. Well, he's charged with Iran sanctions, selling more and more oil, or rather importing more and more oil from Iran, according to this latest story that we may see on our screen soon. So that whole scene is heating up, and we'll see where it goes. Trump claims he wants to talk to the Iranians, and they're not talking to him, and China is busting the sanctions, and so on and so forth. So we'll see where that goes. But certainly we should all take comfort from the fact that we have a fearless leader who wants to protect us against all threats, including the hurricane. Trump is apparently, according to the sources who were supposedly there, Trump suggested multiple times to senior Homeland Security and national security officials that they explore using nuclear bombs to stop hurricanes from hitting the United States.
That'll work.
Yeah.
That'll work. Yeah, you'll show those weather patterns to his boss. This is the problem when you've got an economy that's entirely based on war. When all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, even weather patterns that you don't like. I mean, this is kind of ridiculous, but it really does like sum up the problem with this country.
Yeah, so after you nuke the hurricane and the 150-mile-an-hour winds are blowing, 20 inches of radioactive rain through your broken windows, you're going to say, Trump, it didn't work.
That's so stupid. It just, you're going to get radiation everywhere.
Oh, man. Well, some people are calling Trump a crackpot, and of course that might be an insult to crackpots. Here's Trump refusing to meet the Danish prime minister because she rebuffed his offer to buy Greenland. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
No, you can't. People thought that was a joke at first. I thought it was a joke, but it's not a joke. I mean, there is no such thing as satire anymore. It's dead. Maybe that's why people are getting arrested for it, because you can't make a joke without it like becoming reality. Seriously, buying Greenland, what? I mean, yeah, obviously it's to intimidate Russia or find new places to position nuclear bombs. But this is so pathetic. And as always, he's approaching the wrong person. He does the same thing when that rapper was locked up in Sweden. He's going to the wrong people in Sweden trying to say, hey, can you manipulate the justice system to get this guy out? This is how we do things in America. So, like, this is obviously how you do things there. And now he's going to this prime minister of Denmark when Greenland has its own prime minister that he could talk to say, hey, can I buy your country? At least then he'd be talking to the right person. He's not even talking to the right person. He doesn't care.
Yeah, I mean, I satire about Trump, and just last week, I did a Trump tweet generator, fake Trump tweet that had Trump tweeting I retract my previous tweet about being the second coming of God. Actually, I'm the first coming of God, and don't you ever forget it. And so I showed that to my family members, and they thought it was real. They said, "Oh yeah, that's just Trump."
Yep.
So you can't satirize this guy.
Yep, it's pretty funny because it's satire proof.
So beam me up, Scotty. Let's go to outer space to escape all the problems on Earth. That's probably what Elon Musk and these other post-humanists want to do. But the problem is that you can't get away from the criminal nature of the human animal because it follows you into space. The first space crime has been committed. It's one minor infraction for a woman, one massive felony count against all of humankind. This is apparently one of our first lesbians in space who is having a battle with her significant other, heated custody battle over their in vitro fertilization 6-year-old. And claims that there's been untoward messing with her bank accounts or something like that. So that's the crime claim. First crime in space, and it certainly won't be the last.
Yep. I mean, I just think it's so funny that it's such like an ignominious thing. It's like, hey, you accessed my bank account when you weren't supposed to. It's like, oh, it couldn't be like a bank robbery in space. Well, I guess there are no banks in space, but it just seems like it should be
how does she access the bank account from space?
Well, like they have the internet up there. I mean, they have to be able to communicate, right? I guess. I mean, maybe.
But so, what was she buying? What was she withdrawing to buy? Like she needed to buy some space fries at the local orbiting burger stand or something.
Yeah, she wanted some bedroom slippers. It gets cold up there. I have no idea. I mean, it's just so ignominious. It's like I would just think that like the first crime committed in space should be something cinematic, like a murder. It's like 2 astronauts are stuck up there forever, and they're really sick of each other. So the one guy just like kills the other one. But no, this is not going to be in a movie anytime soon. It's like space withdrawal.
Yeah, like if Neil Armstrong got in a fight with the other moon landing guy about who's going to plant the American flag, and then he just rammed the flagpole right through the guy's heart or something. That would be cinematic. And of course,
that would be worth a movie.
Just think of the perfect pictures that NASA would have of that. I mean, it would be immortalized and all of that. But no, it's just.
I said they would overwrite it. They would overwrite it because they don't know how to store film properly. Silly NASA.
Okay, well, so much for Space: The Final Frontier. I'm Kevin Barrett of False Flag Weekly News with Helen Byniski saying, once again, you've survived another episode telling you about all the craziness happening on Earth and in space. We'll be back next week, God willing, to report more craziness. So until then, have a great week.
Bye-bye.